Imagine leading 100,000 men, the largest Christian army assembled in a century, into enemy territory with absolute confidence in victory, only to die 3 weeks later with an arrow through your throat while watching your son take a second arrow through his face. August 907 A.D. Margrave Luitpold of Bavaria lay on his knees in the mud beside the Danube River, choking on his own blood, surrounded by 300 of his best knights dead or dying. Their armor didn't matter. Their training didn't matter. The holy relics the priests carried didn't save them. And beyond the bodies, as far as anyone could see, the Magyar horse archers just kept circling, firing, waiting like wolves around wounded prey. This wasn't a battle, this was an execution carried out with mathematical precision over 3 days of systematic slaughter. 3 weeks earlier, Luitpold had led 100,000 men into what is now Slovakia with a simple mission: crush the Magyar threat once and for all, march into their homeland, force them to fight, end the raids that had been bleeding Germany for a generation. They were confident, well-armed, blessed by the church, supported by supply wagons stretching back for miles. By August 20, 907, almost none of them were alive. Not captured, not ransomed, not scattered, but dead. The Battle of Pressburg is one of the most catastrophic military disasters in European history, where an entire generation of German nobility was wiped out in a single afternoon. Families that had ruled for centuries just vanished, and the Carolingian Empire collapsed completely. But here's what makes this truly insane. This wasn't some freak accident or bad luck. The Germans walked straight into a trap designed by Magyar tactical genius, and once it closed, there was no escape from the arrow storm that darkened the sky. To understand why 100,000 men marched to their deaths, you need to understand who they were marching against, and why by the year 900, the Germans were willing to risk everything just to make them stop. The Magyars, or as they were called then the Magyars, were not European. They didn't fight like Europeans. They didn't think like Europeans. And that's exactly why they were winning through asymmetric warfare that German tactics couldn't counter. They came from the east, from the Central Asian steppes, where survival meant mastering the horse and the bow before you could walk. In 896, after being pushed out of their homeland by another nomadic group called the Pechenegs, 7 Magyar tribes led by Prince Arpad migrated into the Carpathian Basin, the flat, open plains of modern-day Hungary, and from there they started raiding with devastating efficiency. Not to conquer, not to hold territory permanently, but to take gold, livestock, captives, anything valuable, then disappear before anyone could respond. Their weapon of choice was the composite bow, smaller than the European longbow but devastatingly effective. It could pierce chainmail at 200 paces. And because it was used from horseback, Magyar warriors could fire while moving at full speed. They perfected something called the Parthian shot, turning backward in the saddle while retreating and loosing arrows into pursuing enemies. European knights had never seen anything like it. A typical Magyar raid worked like this with brutal efficiency. A force of 500 to 2,000 horsemen would cross the border at night. By morning, they'd hit a monastery or a village. They'd kill anyone who resisted, take everyone else as slaves, load up on plunder, and ride out. If a local lord managed to gather his knights and give chase, the Magyars would simply outrun them on horses bred for endurance. Between 899 and 955, the Magyars launched over 50 major raids into Western Europe. They hit Italy, Germany, France, even Spain. They burned monasteries, sacked cities, and dragged thousands into slavery. Chronicles from the time describe them as a plague, a punishment from God, the end of the world made flesh. And the worst part, there was no unified response because by 900, the empire that might have stopped them, the Carolingian Empire, the legacy of Charlemagne, was dead in all but name. When Charlemagne was crowned emperor in 800, he ruled from the Atlantic to the Danube with one law, one army, one vision. But his descendants tore it apart through civil wars and succession disputes. By 900, his empire had split into 3 squabbling kingdoms, and East Francia Germany was a mess. The king, Louis the Child, was 7 years old. Real power rested with regional dukes who spent as much time fighting each other as they did defending their lands. Bavaria, Saxony, Swabia, Franconia, each had its own army, its own interests, and very little reason to cooperate. So when the Magyars came, the response was always the same. Pay them to leave with tribute, ransoms, bribes, whatever it took to buy a few months of peace. In 900, they raided Bavaria and Carinthia. Margrave Luitpold paid them off. In 901, they crossed the Alps into northern Italy. The local lords paid them off. In 904, they hit Saxony. Duke Otto paid them off. This went on for years, and every time a German lord handed over gold, the message was clear: we can't stop you. But there was a cost beyond the gold. Villages burned, churches desecrated, families torn apart. The psychological toll was immense. Imagine living in a world where, at any moment, horsemen could appear on the horizon and destroy everything you knew, with no warning, no pattern, just terror. By 906, the German nobility had endured nearly a decade of humiliation, a decade of paying tribute, a decade of failing to protect their own people. Something had to give. And then, in the autumn of 906, something did that changed everything. Duke Otto of Saxony caught a Magyar raiding party off guard near the Unstrut River. His knights, fighting on favorable terrain with the element of surprise, crushed them. Hundreds of Magyar warriors were killed. The plunder was recovered. It was the first real German victory in years. And suddenly, for the first time, the impossible seemed possible. Maybe the Magyars could be beaten if the German dukes stopped fighting each other and actually worked together. That idea, that one intoxicating, dangerous idea, set everything in motion, leading directly to Pressburg. In the winter of 906, informal talks began between the dukes. The question wasn't whether to invade, but how big the army needed to be. The answer everyone arrived at was simple: as big as possible. This couldn't be another raid, another skirmish, another half measure. This had to be total, overwhelming force. Luitpold would lead since he had the most experience fighting Magyars, and Bavaria shared the longest border with them. Archbishop Thietmar would march with them, turning the campaign into a holy crusade with blessed banners and promises of spiritual rewards. Every duchy committed troops, knights, infantry, supply wagons, siege equipment. By spring of 907, the word went out. All able-bodied warriors were to gather at Regensburg, the capital of Bavaria. From there, they'd march down the Danube and into Hungarian territory with one goal: destroy the Magyar settlements, force them into a pitched battle, and annihilate their army. By early summer, the troops began arriving in Regensburg. Knights in chainmail, some with full plate on their chests and shoulders, footmen with spears and shields, archers, engineers, blacksmiths, priests. Chroniclers from the time struggle to give exact numbers, but even the conservative estimates are staggering. Modern historians place the force somewhere between 80,000 and 120,000 men. For context, that's larger than the army William the Conqueror used to invade England in 1066, larger than most Crusader armies, one of the biggest military forces assembled in medieval Europe. It looked unstoppable. In late June 907, the army began to move, with thousands upon thousands of men stretching for miles along the road, marching toward Hungary, marching toward what they thought would be their greatest triumph. What they didn't know was that 150 miles to the east, Magyar scouts were already watching, and Prince Sultan was smiling. The first week was almost festive. The columns stretched so far you couldn't see the end of it. Knights rode in formation, their mail glinting in the summer sun. Infantry sang marching songs. Priests led prayers at every rest stop. For the first time in a decade, they felt powerful. But by the second week, things started to change. The heat became unbearable. July in Central Europe is humid, oppressive, the kind of weather that turns armor into an oven. Men started shedding equipment. Water supplies ran low. The Danube was close, but the sheer number of troops made logistics a nightmare. Then there was the dust. With that many feet, hooves, and wagon wheels moving along dirt roads, clouds of dust hung in the air constantly, coating everything. By late July, they entered Lower Austria, and that's when things got strange. The villages were empty. Not abandoned in panic, just empty. No people, no livestock, homes intact but silent, fields recently harvested but no one around. It was as if entire communities had simply vanished.